I'm Donna Quinn, the one that's been promising you rewards all weekend if you'd stay until the last speaker. Thanks for still being here. A few weeks ago, I went out to dinner with some friends to celebrate a birthday. We were talking about how warm it had been and how we cooled off. I said when we were young, we just turned on the pump. Looking bewildered, they all said at once, "What is turn on the pump?" I recalled to them a cherished memory I have of the neighborhood kids cheering on my mother and her sisters, who with a wrench risked all to turn on the fire hydrant, or the pump as we called it, for all the kids on the block to cool off. The Chicago streets became our playground and our swimming pool. Maybe this is where I grew to love people and politics. I am deeply honored to be with you today. From the child jumping and running under the spray of the pump to Harvard Divinity School is quite a leap. The seeds of my faith were planted by an Irish Catholic family with a mom and dad who were a lot of fun. My dad worked in politics for the city of Chicago, and together they had 3 children, all of whom entered religious life. My brother is a pastor in a Chicago parish. My sister was a nun in our community. She left the community and continued teaching before her death from cancer 6 years ago. I used to use these identifiers. I am a feminist, Chicagoan, Irish, Catholic, White Sox fan, in that order. I'm sure you all know that Boston College beat Notre Dame, don't you? Even Ted Kennedy was happy last night. Now, I know that I am a feminist, still located in Chicago, with Irish roots, but always in awe of the universe and working to become a lover of Earth. One identifier downfall, though, has been the all-male world of baseball. Marge Tuitt used to say that you can always tell much about a person by the question she has in her heart or asks at any time in her life. One question I have at this time is regarding my identifier as Catholic. I used to say, "This is my church, and I will work to change it because I love it." Then later I said, "This church is immoral, and if I am to identify with it, I better work to change it." More recently, I am saying all organized religions are immoral in their gender discrimination. Organized religions foster a network of good, holy people who work for justice causes, but in the end, those at the top do not have the courage to stop the immorality of violence perpetrated on those who are female. We are then told to be silent. There can be no discussion, nor can there be dissent. This is not a picture of democracy as a way of life. Be it a state or a religion, this repressive silence represents a country or a church taken over by the military or those who have sold their souls to a way of life that does not value women and children. Religious leaders are known for speaking out on human rights issues, like war and the death penalty, but not on women's issues like reproductive rights, electing feminists to public office or church office, women's ordination, or violence perpetrated on women in the United States or worldwide. No matter what their stand is on issues, if they do not believe in women's rights in church or state, their words on issues are like noisy gongs or clanging cymbals. I didn't know I'd be so nervous about this. The root cause of evil in the church, and thus in the world, is gender discrimination. As long as that is allowed in organized religions, the moral fiber of the world is broken. There is no seamless garment that the Catholic Church is always promoting. Nothing will stop world violence, which manifests itself in pedophilia, war, terrorists, and snipers, unless we stop the violence against women and children, which is proclaimed in our churches, temples, and mosques. We must focus our effort, gather input, analyze the data, strategize, and act for gender equity. This is not new, but we have to renew it. I would like to share with you some personal experiences that I've had with the institutional Catholic Church, what I learned from those experiences, and what my questions are today. Let me begin by saying that as a child and young woman, I went to daily Mass and communion when I wasn't in mortal sin from impure thoughts. I went to so many Masses, or liturgies as they are now called, in grade school and high school that I think I have had enough for a lifetime. I used to watch boy altar servers and think, I can do that. My work to ordain women began at an early age. In 7th grade, an order priest visited our classroom telling of the great deeds of their priests. In concluding his talk, he asked, "Now, how many want to be priests?" My hand shot up along with several boys in the classroom. An audible groan came from the boys, while the priest smiled and said, "Oh no, girls cannot become priests." My question still remains, why not? My mother died in childbirth when I was 11. I think death is the first and most devastating form of violence perpetrated on humanity. I still shout at God, saying even I could have planned it better. I think organized religions were invented to explain it and address it. 17 years of my life were dedicated to teaching grade and high school in the Catholic school system and later college level. My question now is, why is it that if the church preaches justice, there is no justice in teaching 6 sacraments for girls and 7 for boys? Why would I want to work in or teach in a system that perpetrates that kind of thinking? My next 25 years were spent with Chicago Catholic women. Before I came to Chicago in 1974, I had given time to issues of racism and ecumenism, but I knew I was looking for more. It is strange how events happen in one's lifetime. Having just arrived in Chicago, teaching in a high school, I went to a conference sponsored by the Association of Chicago Priests. That fateful afternoon in 1974, I signed up for a workshop facilitated by Marge Tewitt. When it was time for questions, I asked, "Where is the women's group in Chicago?" Marge picked up on this question, as did those in the group, and she came up to me afterwards saying that if I started such a women's group, she would help me in any way possible. Chicago Catholic Women was born. In the early 70s, only nuns had strong networks and organizations. The only group for Catholic laywomen was the National Council of Catholic Women, with its membership supported by diocesan chapters under the leadership of a male priest moderator appointed by the bishop of that diocese. Chicago Catholic Women was the first Catholic-rooted women's group to welcome and include both laywomen and nuns who were also part of the laity. In the early days of our organization, we sent an invitation to the Chicago delegates of the National Call to Action to attend one of our meetings. Only one male delegate came to report back to Cardinal Cody about the number of nuns and the number of laywomen in our group. He looked at the group chaired by Ann Ida Gannon and asked, "How many of you are laywomen?" All hands went up. No, he said. No, I mean, how many of you are sisters? I could have cried when every hand in the room went up. He and the cardinal who sent him found frustration. We had found the true meaning of feminism. Nuns came through the 60s supporting the civil rights movement. While we preached and believed in equality, we knew by the 70s that this was lacking for women, not only in society, but particularly in the church. Vatican II, the Vietnam War, and the civil rights movement raised consciousness for liberation, but women would have to organize for their own equality. With new lifestyles emerging for nuns in the late 60s and early 70s, nuns could no longer be readily identified by their dress. For lack of numbers, nuns were no longer packed into houses known as convents. Some continued to live in convents, but if they did not teach or work in that parish, they had to pay rent. Some chose to move into apartments to live closer to the people of God. Nuns also moved into other areas of work than teaching or hospital ministry. These women were educated, intelligent, loving, funny, with a passion for justice in the world, but for the most part finding it difficult to let go of their loyalty to the church. They became lawyers and helped immigrants find justice. They worked with farm workers. They did social work, helping women find employment, housing, and food for their children. They worked at peace and justice centers, targeting corporations and shareholders for their investments in weapons of war. They worked together to eliminate the death penalty. Some even dared to work on issues which could result in expulsion from their religious communities. That is, abortion rights, homosexual rights, and the ordination of women. Nuns prepared liturgies using readings from feminist theologians and poetry written by women, but most were unwilling to give up Scripture and Jesus. Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament in the convent and lights out at a certain time gave way to listening to the stories of others and late hours at meetings working for justice issues and doing the analyzing and strategizing for the movement. We knew who the enemy was, and we were willing to devote our lives to changing these structures which oppress. Margaret Traxler once said, "It is deplorable that religions, as interpreted by men, subjugate women in the name of the deity. To do wrong is one thing. To do wrong in the name of the Almighty is especially heinous. We have a duty as women to demand our equal rights. Nothing less can be in the mind of God." In the beginning days of Chicago Catholic women, our meetings were composed primarily of nuns. Gradually, it began to include articulate, dedicated, wonderful women who had left religious communities. If you see a woman with Catholic and gray roots at this conference, ask her if she was ever in a religious community. I am only here today because of the great women I have met and talked with and learned from in my lifetime. Women at this conference like Nadine Foley, Rosemary Redford Ruther, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, Mary Hunt, Carolyn Gifford, Cabrini and Sheila Dirk, Ada Marie Sassi Diaz, Carolyn Farrell, Addie Wyatt, Nancy Corcoran, and Corinne Sanders, and so many others left unnamed that I've talked with throughout the weekend. My experience with the Catholic Church has been that the Catholic hierarchy has always been very nervous about our growing movement. Bernard Law, now Cardinal of Boston, was once heard to say that we must be stopped. We wouldn't be stopped, and so Pope Paul VI issued that most embarrassing statement titled The Declaration on the Question of the Admission of Women to the Ministerial Priesthood, or the penis statement, which has yet to be retracted. We were locked out of church facilities for meetings and for fundraisers. The Jewish temple, the Episcopal Church, and the Presbyterian churches nearby took us in, with one Episcopal minister asking us, if you cannot discuss the issue of ordination in a church, where else can you discuss it? We asked for employment openings in parish ministries so that we might list them in our newsletter. The Chancery sent a letter to every pastor saying to disregard our request. We wrote to parishes asking that our activities might be listed in their parish bulletins. One pastor returned our letter with this written across the top of our letter. Dear Donna, save the postage. Your announcements have as much chance of getting into our bulletin as the proverbial snowball. Signed, Monsignor Haggerty. On October 7th, 1984, the New York Times published a full-page ad declaring a diversity of opinions regarding abortion exists among committed Catholics. It went on to ask the bishops to facilitate a dialogue on the issue. This was partially a response to Archbishop O'Connor's request to the people of New York not to endorse Mondale and Ferraro. After we signed the ad, the Vatican struck back. A letter from Bishop Hamer, head of the Vatican Congregation for Religious and Secular Institutes, he was like right under the Pope at the Vatican, was sent to the 13 congregations of nuns, charging that the religious signers were seriously lacking in religious submission and must publicly retract their view or be dismissed from their orders. About 20 nuns from my community said if I was dismissed, they would go with me. The Pope rewarded Hamer by making him a cardinal. Hamer came to Chicago in the midst of all this to speak to the men and women of religious communities. Chicago Catholic women organized a demonstration in front of the cathedral. Young girls and women held signs which read, "We are all poped out," and "We want a church for our daughters." Everyone wore black armbands. I don't like that black armbands. I'll tell you that I don't like. I'm real conscious of color. Well, anyway, we did it. I remember watching women nervously take their armbands off as they lined up in the auditorium to meet Hamer. I kept mine on. He spoke with each one individually and started poking at sleeves or asking why some nuns were wearing pink dresses. I knew that I would be the only signer of the ad to speak with him. I waited my turn and approached him, stating my name and saying that I was faster than he did. And out the front door with her amazing camera. He came back to me shouting that I had organized the whole demonstration. I reminded myself that I stood there for all the signers and would not let this deter me from what I wanted to say. I began to tell him that, like him, I too was a Dominican, and wouldn't Dominic want us to work with poor women who were victims of rape and incest? I got as far as the word Dominican, and he started shouting that I was not a good Dominican, and I ought to become one. I continued that I worked with poor women in a shelter, and I got as far as poor women, and he shouted that it was time for me to learn what a really good nun was. He was quite tall, so I was looking up to him the whole time. He looked like Yul Brynner. Thinking this is not going too well. I started seeing black spots in front of my eyes and thought if I fainted now, I would fall right at his feet. And this I didn't want. I was determined I would stand upright until I finished what I wanted to say. My last point was to ask him if he would meet with the signers. He could hardly respond. He was so livid. His face was turning red and his arm went up And he was saying, I'll give you a meeting. You come to Rome. I will give you a meeting. By now, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I left him and walked across the front of the auditorium, but I knew I was going to faint. Strangely, I did not want the other women in the auditorium to see me do this. I guess I wanted to be strong for all of us. My face must have been as white as my dress. Cardinal Bernardin came over to me and asked me to sit down. I sat down, but I could not talk. I honestly did not know that a priest from the Vatican could be so evil. What did I take from this experience? My belief in a woman's right to choose was stronger than ever. And I looked at these holy men from the Vatican in a brand new light. Then, in November 1990, I was asked by the Peoria National Organization of Women, I don't know if it's for women or of women. It's for, isn't it? Okay, thanks. To speak at their meeting about reproductive rights of women. I received a call from Kay Ash, the president of our community, saying that she had just had a call from Bishop John Myers of Peoria, now he's in Newark, New Jersey, telling her to direct me not to come to Peoria. She told him this was not her job and he would have to call me directly. Thank God for Kay. He called and said that if I came to Peoria, he would report me to Rome. I asked if he had spoken with the women of Peoria or officers of Now, and he said he had not. I asked him how old he was. I couldn't believe this conversation. I said that I was amazed someone younger than I was would have such conservative thinking. See, my grandmother died on the boat on the way over from Ireland, so I thought he was acting like a feudal lord and had not the right to tell me where I could travel in the United States. She had the courage of her convictions. So I went to Peoria, did the talk, and he reported me to Rome. In 1994, the National Coalition of American Nuns went to Rome to protest the synod called to discuss religious life with no women delegates to cast a vote, as issues were being discussed about us. We met with women there from around the world voicing the same protest. This was the wonderful part. We also organized a march of protest, and we walked across St. Peter's Square holding banners saying they're meeting about us without us. I had the 3 heavy banners made in Chicago. I rolled them up and carried them over to Rome, thinking that, I didn't want to have to carry these back on the plane. Nowadays, you probably won't even get on the plane with those. But anyway, when we were detained by the Italian police, they confiscated 2 of our 3 banners. I knew then how important it would be to carry the one banner, which had now become so precious, back to Chicago and preserve it for history. The Catholic, okay. I've got parts crossed out in case I had to wrap it up. The seed of faith planted and nourished by family, friends, and feminists keeps me going today. Several years ago, one of our nuns asked me why I stay in the community. She was really upset. Why do you stay in? I think she would love to have seen me go. I responded that it is the sisterhood that keeps me in the Dominican community. I do believe that we need more gatherings of women to say how our spirituality is leading us into the future. What are the strategies we want to follow, and how will the Spirit lead us? You and this conference are a good start. The women's movement has been church for me. On forms sent out by the Dominican community saying, list your diocese, I always list women church. I was so excited. I was ecstatic to come to this conference. This gathering for me has been a Eucharistic celebration. I always say, out with Scripture. Just throw it out. What better stories than those we have been told and those we hold in our hearts as yet unspoken? You are holy women. I give thanks for you and for all those women who have gone before us. We have been blessed in our journey this weekend. We bless each other now, and we will be stronger and more courageous in our journey home because we know we have each other.